Me at all?
Uh,
We can hear you.
Won't work out.
Push.
all right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is June 21st, 2023, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Fry. He said that he would be absent tonight. Commissioner Havner. He said that he might be attending. Commissioner Kaiser.
No.
Commissioner Milliman.
Present.
Commissioner Maury Bidu.
Present.
Commissioner Podar stated that she would be absent tonight. Commissioner Will. Vice Chair Dye. Looks like he's absent. Chair Lockwood.
Present.
Looks like we have 4 in attendance.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I interrupted you.
Oh, I was going to say that we don't have a quorum.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, our first item is a director's report.
Good evening. I have that. My name is Erin Wardell. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager for Washington County. A couple of items for updates today. As some of you may recall from your briefings on the climate-friendly and equitable communities new state rules, we were required to update our community development code relating to parking regulations. We requested an extension from the state on the deadline to adopt those changes. The original deadline was July 1st, so we didn't have very much time to do that. And DLCD did grant us an 18-month extension on that. So we have now until December 31st of 2024 to update our development code. This is really good because the state Land Conservation and Development Commission is considering updates to those rules. They'll be considering those updates in July and November. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, for us to wait to update our development code until we know what the final rules are going to be. So you will hear more about this going forward. That's relating to the parking reform B requirements, which require you to either eliminate all parking minimums or price and manage on-street parking. So we'll be doing some technical analysis and sharing information with you as we go forward and consider what amendments we need to make to our code to come into compliance with those rules. We are directly implementing the parking rules that already came into effect, which was no minimum parking for certain development types, things like daycares and regulated affordable housing, and within proximity to transit corridors. So we have staff guidance to directly implement those pieces of the rules, and there was no extension possible for those. We also received an extension on some of the transportation performance measures requirements. So we now have until 2027 to adopt those. That sounds like it's a really long time from now, but I think it's going to go really fast. But the benefit of waiting until 2027 is that we can hopefully roll those transportation performance measures into a major update of our transportation system plan. So these are all good things. We're really happy to be working collaboratively with our partners at the state in order to make the updates that we need to make. Next update, the legislative session. We were tracking a number of bills that were held up while the Senate was unable to achieve a quorum. And so we are anxiously awaiting what's going to happen this week. The legislature has to be done, I believe, on Sunday. I think that's their last day. Rob's nodding, so I think I got that right. So if any of those bills that we've been tracking do move forward and move on for adoption, we will provide an update to the Planning Commission, most likely by email, and share that with you. And then finally, we have a number of items in our Tier 1 work program that we could support with grant funding. And so we're tracking a number of grants that are out there. In particular, there is some state grant funding relating to housing, which could support our community development code assessment work that we wanted to do in order to simplify our community development code. So we will share with you what we decide to do moving forward, but it's good to see that there's some grant opportunities out there to help us support this work. So that's it for updates. Moving into our meetings. For tonight's meeting, you have 2 work sessions. We will be talking about our significant natural resources update on that project, and then giving you an overview of the 2023 urban growth boundary expansions in Tigard and North Plains, and talking about next steps because you will have some actions to take on those. For our upcoming PC meetings, we have a pretty light summer. So we are recommending that we cancel the next few meetings unless there are topics coming forward or things that the Planning Commission would like us to share with you. But we don't have any ordinances ready to file imminently, and we didn't have any work session topics identified. So right now we'd recommend canceling July 5th, July 19th, and August 2nd. That would bring us back on August 16th. At that time, we would tentatively be able to talk about the UGB expansion ordinances, but that sort of depends on timing. We could think about some other possible work session items, since that does give us a little bit of time to think on that agenda. And that's all I have for the director's report.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions for Ms. Wardell? I have one question. Who writes the grants?
Oh, that's a really good question. Typically, we write them in-house. Sometimes, if it's a very technically specific grant, we will hire outside consultant support in order to do that.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Let's go to our next item, which is public communication. Ms. Aguilar, yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to note that Vice Chair Dye and Commissioner Will have joined us. And so we have 6 now PC members. We do have a quorum, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you.
And we do have 1 person who signed up for public communication this evening. We ask that Mr. Long please start by saying his full name and location.
Real quick, Susan, what was the amount of time for the testimony?
10 minutes,
Thank you.
since he's representing a CPO.
Good evening. It's nice to see you all. My name's Jim Long. I reside at 10655 Southwest Hall Boulevard in Tigard. I'm chair of CPO 4M. I'm also chair of the CCI, the Committee for Community Involvement Subcommittee on Significant Natural Resources. And I'm here to talk about something that's not on your agenda, but it's connected a little bit, but it's not on your agenda. And I sent out to Todd a few hours ago a compilation we put together, a draft we put together, and I don't know if you've got it at all or not. Did that get forwarded to you? I guess not, since you're not nodding. It's a bird and critter list. It's a draft we put together. So we have a draft of a bird and critter list that's an incomplete but evolving list of bird and critters that originally started in the old town of Metzger in unincorporated Washington County. And in response to the LCDC Goal 5 enforcement order in Washington County, as we talk about protecting habitat for wildlife, we need to be aware of the many diverse named species. So page 2 of what I'll be sending out, if you don't have it already, is the original CPO 4M bird and critter list compiled by 2 brilliant neighbors near 82nd and Cedar Crest. Pat Forsyth, who is a science journalist, and Rich Hansen, who was a retired biology teacher for Tigard High School. So this list, which includes 55 birds and over a dozen critters, which was compiled by them for what they saw and heard and smelled, and it covers just 2 acres of land that was the focus of a land use approval by Department of Land Use and Transportation back in 2015, 2016. So it's a list of the animals that were there. And since then, I have taken some things, compiled a list off the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife website of other creatures that we believe would be in Washington County. I've been working with a friend of mine who's a retired wildlife habitat specialist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to identify those things. The 4th page includes other fish and wildlife outside of Oregon, but many people love birds and watching wildlife, and they're in their native environment. So this list it's just a list. It's not an inventory of wildlife or a census of wildlife, but simply the beginning of a list of what exists in our community now. And I could do a screen share if you allow screen shares. I could show it to you. I'm seeing Teresa kind of shake her head no. But so I have this list, and I sent it to Todd earlier, and I guess I should send it also to the clerk for the Planning Commission, because it's something I do want you all to see. It talks about the different types of birds, the amphibians, the mammals, the reptiles, the game birds, and other species. And of course, we talk about threatened and endangered species as well as other things. Now, I'm not a botanist or a biologist. I don't want to pretend to be. But I'm very passionate about this. We want to get this information out to you. I've been learning a number of things. I mean, there's a lot of animals. Some are daytime animals, diurnal animals, and some are nighttime nocturnal animals like skunks and raccoons. And then there's also crepuscular animals, which come out in dawn and dusk. So there's a number of different animals that we want to name and talk about and make people aware of as we go through this process of looking at a new ordinance, perhaps for fish and wildlife that has clear and objective standards. And also on this list, I have started to develop the rare habitats for native plants and the oak savannas, the wetland prairies, and upland prairies. And these habitats were not included in the original habitat assessment guidelines. So the person who's helping me, the retired person from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, was a petitioner on one of the appeals that was approved by LUBA, particularly regarding the habitat assessment guidelines. So we're looking at invasive species, and the fact that there are declining species. For more than 60% of the birds are declining, and we don't really necessarily get into all the other smaller critters, the bees and the butterflies, which are also declining. So my ask of you is maybe you can help if you know your neighborhood and you appreciate wildlife. If you see something that's not on the list, send me an email or give me a call, and we'll help develop this list so it's in really good shape in the next year or so. So I wanted to bring this forth. I think it's important that we actually name the critters, name the creatures, name the species that we're trying to protect. And so this is the beginning of a list, and I hope it is successful in helping the discussion along. I do want to say that I did try and attend and speak at a meeting a couple of months ago when the enforcement order came out. I was going to encourage you all to read the enforcement order by LCDC. It's very full of information, and I think you'll gain some knowledge and insight into what's happened. We've been keeping significant natural resources on our agenda at CPO4M for the last 7 or 8 years, and we're glad that there's progress happening. So I look forward to working with the groups and the Technical Advisory Committee and others to move this forward. So if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But otherwise, I will make sure that this gets sent out again to the clerk and gets into your hands, and I'll get it out to the commissioners also. Thank you for paying attention.
Well, thank you,
And
Mr.
happy summer. Happy summer at the beginning of the beautiful
Yeah,
summer.
today. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Long. I
You're
see Ms. Wardell has her hand up.
I just wanted to clarify that we did receive that testimony, but we received it very close to the meeting this evening. And our policy is that if we receive testimony after noon, we hold it and don't send it out to the Planning Commission. In the past, planning commissioners have said that they felt overburdened by receiving too much information right before the meeting starts when they won't have a chance to read it before the meeting. And so we will share that with everyone in the next few days so that you'll have a chance to review it.
Thank you. I'm just a volunteer. I'm sorry I was a little late in getting it to you.
Totally fine. I just didn't want you to think we weren't sending it out. We will send it out. We just haven't had a chance yet.
Thank you.
Would anyone else in attendance like to communicate to the Planning Commission on non-agenda items? If so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. Seeing no one, we can move on.
Thank you. Our next item is our work sessions, and we have 2 tonight. And the first one is significant natural resources, a focused look at fish and wildlife habitat project update.
Thank you. And Michelle Miller will give that presentation. And she was just being promoted, so it might take her a second.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner in Community Planning with Land Use and Transportation. This presentation is an update on the work we've been doing to update our significant natural resource regulations and an update from the last time we met in March. Next slide. So since our last meeting, there's been a lot happening on multiple fronts. I'll first go over the Land Conservation and Development Enforcement Order and the stay, and then we'll talk about the update and the work that we are doing with our consultants on the project, a focused look at fish and wildlife habitat, and then talk about some of the highlights from the first Technical Advisory Committee meeting, which includes our inventory work. Then I'll talk a little bit about the next steps and where the project's headed, and then go over the public outreach that we've been doing. Next slide. Since the 1970s, the foundation of the statewide planning program for land use planning in Oregon has been the 19 statewide planning goals. Statewide Planning Goal 5 requires local governments identify and protect significant natural resource areas. It also addresses many other types of resources like scenic or historic areas, but we're going to be focused on the natural resources for the update to the county's Goal 5 program. The procedures and requirements for complying with Goal 5 are located in the Oregon Administrative Rules Division 23. The county adopted policies and regulations in the early 1980s, which were acknowledged by the state. But state law changed in 2017 and expanded the requirements for land use regulations to be clear and objective to apply to all housing, not just needed housing and on buildable land. And on all land, not just buildable land, excuse me. Next slide. Since 2018, the county's natural resource regulations have been under legal scrutiny because of those changes in 2017. Late last year, a petition to the Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC, was filed stating that since some of the county's regulations were not clear and objective because of the Land Use Board of Appeals remand, we are out of compliance with state law. LCDC agreed with the petitioner in this case and issued an enforcement order in May, directing us to amend our regulations by October 1st, 2024 to address those clear and objective standard requirements. LCDC also issued a stay on certain development that might affect wildlife habitat effective May 4th, 2023. Next slide. The stay, meaning that our planning staff may not review residential development applications that would impact wildlife habitat. It does not impact non-residential projects or projects where development has already occurred, and that the property has already been through the development review process and perhaps mitigation. Next slide. Turning to our project, a focused look at fish and wildlife habitat, we're taking a focused look at two types of Goal 5 resources, fish and wildlife habitat, sometimes known as riparian habitat and wildlife habitat or upland wildlife habitat. This is our homepage for the project website where people can go to get information about the project, sign up for updates, get some background about Goal 5, including frequently asked questions, and see the project timeline and scope. Next slide. So this graphic shows the three main steps of the Goal 5 process, beginning with the inventory steps, where the natural resources are identified as significant and mapped, as outlined in the Division 23 rules. The OARs do not necessarily require jurisdictions to start at the beginning of the inventory process when conducting an update to an existing Goal 5 program like ours. Likewise, our Board of County Commissioners thought some updates were needed to the inventory, especially the county's wildlife habitat. So we're starting with the inventory step and focusing on deciding what natural resources are significant inside the urban unincorporated portions of the county. I'll talk more about this step and our process later on in the presentation. As the inventory work is complete, we'll then move on to step 2, the ESEE analysis. This is where we identify different land uses that could conflict with the significant habitat resources and conduct an economic, social, environmental, energy, ESEE analysis, and the impacts of allowing, limiting, or prohibiting conflicting land uses within the significant natural resource areas through those various lenses or perspectives of each of the ESEE categories. Based on the analysis and balancing those factors, a preliminary decision is made on the degree of protection, if any, will extend to the natural resource, which is step 3. If the analysis and decision is to place some limits on development or prohibit land uses, then the next step is to develop the Goal 5 program with policies and land use regulations, which we will propose through our ordinance process. The rough timeline shown on the right shows where we estimate what we will be working on along the various steps in the process through our project. You can see that some of these steps overlap and are a bit iterative. Next slide. So this project, we've described it as a limited update because it's intended to build on existing inventories and available maps. The inventory update process will look at the map sites identified on the counties and metros inventories within the urban areas that are outside of the city, also known as the county's urban unincorporated area. It should be generally consistent with the county's Goal 5 decisions and policy directions expressed in the past. Because the county's current comprehensive plan provides clear policy direction on the protection of water-related habitats, and it also meets Title 13, Metro's Title 13 requirements, which are found in the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan. So the boards endorse this level of protection as adequately protected, but we do need to make some updates to make them clear and objective. For wildlife habitat, new clear and objective implementing measures that are consistent with the past practices and earlier land use decisions may be proposed. Next slide. So the inventory work will start with our county's inventory of significant natural resources. You can see those there. Water and wetlands and fish and wildlife habitat, as well as wildlife habitat, and Metro's more recent regionally significant fish and wildlife inventory and the classifications that are shown on this slide of riparian habitat and upland habitat. Next slide. Here is a comparison of the county and Metro's maps of the significant natural resources for the Bethany area. The county's SNR map is on the left with the water-related habitat in blue.
We don't have
sorry.
the,
Next slide. Next slide, sorry. Oh, there. Sorry about that. So here's that comparison slide of the Bethany area. So the county's significant natural resource map is on the left with the water-related habitat in blue and the wildlife habitat shown in green. The metro map is to the right. So these resources of upland habitat are shown in shades of green and the riparian in shades of blue. One unique thing and feature about the Metro's inventory maps are that they are based on a classification system, which shows the quality of the habitat, and the county's maps do not contain that level of detail. Next slide, please. Oops. So our inventory steps, our project will follow these steps when conducting the inventory update, and I'll go over them in the next few slides. Our study areas for the urban unincorporated areas, along with a buffer area to see the entire habitat patch size, for example, or a wildlife corridor connection. Our consultants will combine the data in both of the individual inventory maps and consolidate it into one significant natural resource map to evaluate. The next step will be to remove any of the developed areas that have happened over time, and then we'll look at evaluating the resources and determine which resources are considered significant. The final step will also be to incorporate the city community plan data that they might have done for their Goal 5 resources as they conduct comprehensive planning in new UGB expansion areas where that's available. Next slide. So our consultants have begun working on evaluating the inventory and developing a methodology for updating our significant natural resource maps. They're now taking this methodology and running a GIS analysis or a computer analysis of the consolidated maps using the methodology. We don't have the results or the natural resource draft report yet. We'll be sharing those results later this summer. This slide shows an example of the county and metro mapping on the north side of the Cooper Mountain area. The county's mapping is shown on the left and Metro's is on the right, both having an aerial view. You can see that they're basically the same outlines, but the categories of the resources may be mapped differently. So with the blue being the water-related resources and the green being the wildlife habitat for the county's resources. And on the right, the Metro's map maybe shows the riparian areas a little bit wider than the county's water-related resources. And so there's some overlap of the different categories on these maps. Next slide. So for consolidating the riparian or water-related resources, it will be based on Metro's classifications of 1 and 2 riparian habitats. Remember those different shadings of the quality of the habitat. Since that data is more accurate, it's more recent, and it's more consistent with our clean water services standards. The county water and riparian related habitats that do not overlap with Metro's will drop off of the analysis. Next slide. So here's the map showing the consolidation that's occurred for the riparian habitat. The small shots are of the county and the Metro map on that earlier slide. And here's the consolidation with the riparian classifications being highlighted. You can see that in some instances, the wildlife habitat was reclassified as riparian habitat, and that's because riparian habitat receives greater protection. So we're prioritizing that protection for those county previously wildlife habitat areas. Next slide.
I have a question
Oh, sure,
on the previous slide.
sure.
Looking at the larger map on the right side, does that blue area mean that those areas are set aside, or what is the significance of that?
So right now we're at the inventory phase.
Right.
So they are identified as the significant riparian habitat areas. And we're using the metro mapping. The current rules for the riparian habitat, we follow Title 13, Metro's Title 13. And so those areas are considered to have strictly limited or moderately limited protections. And the rules will likely reflect that and continue with that along that vein. So they will receive the highest level of protection.
Okay, thank you.
So we're at slide 15. You could go to the next slide. Thanks. So for the county wildlife habitat, now we're turning to the upland wildlife habitat.
Michelle, I
So
think we want to go back one slide.
Next one. The consolidated map.
I think you want slide 15 where you're
Oh.
starting.
Oh, okay. All right, so this is the area showing the consolidated riparian habitat, and that matches the Metro's riparian habitat 1 and 2. Dark blue being the highest classification and the highest value habitat, and the lighter blue showing the...
You're actually on slide 16 now, so it's the consolidated upland.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So Chuck,
So
if you could just go back one slide.
Oh, yes, I had wanted slide 15. Oh, okay.
15. Yeah, there you go.
15. Sorry if you misspoke. I was looking at the wrong thing. Sorry about that, everybody. So turning to the upland wildlife habitat SNR, the consolidated map will include the combined metro upland habitat and the county's habitat along with the SNR areas where the habitat area does not overlap. So we'll be taking both of those and looking at all of the areas that are upland habitat, Metro's upland habitat, and the county's habitat combined. So that looks like what you've already seen in slide 16 here. The county's mapping and Metro's mapping separated on those smaller pictures of the aerial, and then the consolidated upland map looks is the larger map. And the bright colors are where there are some differences between where the counties and Metro have mapped the wildlife habitat or upland habitat differently. That can happen because these were mapped at different time periods. Our county mapping is 15 years older, and so there'll be differences where development may have occurred, and Metro has used different criteria for analyzing upland habitat. So the bright green are where the county had shown there to be upland wildlife habitat, and the fuchsia color is where Metro has determined that there is upland wildlife habitat areas. So that's where those kind of differences are, and where they overlap are the kind of the darker shade of green, kind of through the middle of this map. Next slide, please. So next, we will begin to look at determining which resources are considered to be significant. This map shows the gray areas where development has occurred around the consolidated riparian habitat, and the green areas showing the consolidated upland wildlife habitat. So those bright green patches are some of the smaller habitat patches that may fall out of the determination of significance due to their size or whether they have some development on them as well. Kind of see those circled areas showing where those may exist. And so that's what the GIS analysis is going to consider in this next phase. So for incorporating the city's significant natural, next slide, please. So for incorporating the city's significant natural resources for new UGB expansion areas that are still within the urban unincorporated area, we will apply either the natural resource inventories that they adopted as part of their comprehensive planning process for these areas, or we will apply the county's significant natural resource inventory method, consolidated method process that we've used for the other urban unincorporated areas. If the city process hasn't been completed, or whether they may have used the metro inventory or the similar inventories that we're using for the other urban unincorporated areas. And so those will also be added to our determination of significance maps and our updated inventory mapping. Next slide. So a technical advisory committee has been formed for this project, and we've had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. Here's the roster of the people from the various agencies and local governments and stakeholders that are interested in the project. The TAC will advise Washington County staff and our consultants on the technical aspects of the project as we update the county's Goal 5 program for natural resources. And so the TAC members will provide advice as representatives of their organization and give us feedback on and advice on the approach that we're taking. Next slide. So the next steps on the inventory and analysis part of the project, we will be preparing a draft inventory for review of the by the Technical Advisory Committee, the Planning Commission, and the public later on this summer. After the inventory work is complete, the next step will be to analyze the impacts of allowing those uses that could conflict with the identified significant natural resources. As I spoke a bit earlier, this will be the ESEE analysis, and we'll look at those consequences that could result from the decision to allow, limit, or prohibit the conflicting uses. And the ESEE analysis could indicate different levels of protection for the resources depending on the land use impacts for those types of resources. And our consultants are developing a methodology for the ESEE, and we will be sharing that at our next meeting with our Technical Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission, as well as the public. Turning to next slide. Turning to some of the public engagement tools that we will be, as we proceed through the project, will include a lot of different types of outreach. We, like I said, we have a project website that will be updated at all stages of the project, and we hope for early and continued stakeholder outreach, outreach to underrepresented groups through community-based organization and other community events. We have our TAC up and running, and our plan is to go where the community is, attending these events, farmers markets, for example, throughout the summer, providing information on the project, signing people up for emails and updates. We will also be having in-person and and online open houses. We call a community forum. We'll be having several of those throughout the project, and also briefings through to the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners, following up with eventual hearings. Next slide.
And sorry, Michelle, the slide was also ahead, so.
Oh, right. I
yeah,
see that.
there we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the really important things is our equity inclusion goal is to involve all of Washington County community, particularly people living with lower incomes, disabilities, Latino, Pacific Islander, African American, and other people of color, and people who do not speak English as their primary language in our process. We're doing this by reaching out to CBOs through the process and events that focus on underrepresented communities, as well as our webpage and different methods of translating important pieces of our process. Next slide. So here are some of the community events that we have attended or are planning on attending later this summer. Feel free to stop by if you see us at one of these events. We've had a really good time meeting different people in the community. We also have a really exciting spin the wheel, and you can have your share at trivia too. And we're handing out some swag that is extremely popular. So you may see a lot of Washington County land use and transportation bags in orange and yellow throughout the summer. So it's been really fun so far getting out there. Next slide. So we have our second TAC meeting where we'll be discussing the inventory results and ESEE methods. That'll happen in the middle of August and tentatively scheduled for August 21st. We also will be doing our property owner courtesy notice in August. Those property owners that could be impacted by changes to the regulations that may have significant natural resources on their property. The first of two community forums, that's our in-person open house. We'll be sharing the inventory results, ESEE methods, and code concepts, which will likely happen in September, along with an online open house that will be kind of web-based, sharing information that way. And also those community events and updates to our Focus Look page, and continue updating this commission as we work on the inventory results and what we've heard so far, and as well as the outcomes of our community forum, likely in September. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have, or comments, anything you'd like to share. Next slide, please. There we go.
Commissioners, comments and questions. Commissioner Will.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle Miller. I wanted to say to the other planning commissioners that after hearing this presentation, it helped clarify some of the things that I didn't understand from the TAC meeting. So thank you. It looks like we have a multiple step process, and I think you guys are getting a good start here on this first process related to mapping, and I look forward to seeing that as you outlined. And it sounds like, just to clarify, Michelle, so when we'll talk about mapping, and then in the next step later this year, we'll talk about criteria and clear and objective standards for how things get reviewed. That'll be a future step. Is that correct, Michelle?
Right. So we'll take what we learned from the inventory, and so we'll have this bundle of these are our significant natural resources. Then we'll do that analysis of kind of deciding and balancing what level of protection those resources should have. And then the final step is developing regulations or standards and policies that reflect that analysis that we did. So we'll kind of get a consensus along the way. And there's that kind of show your work middle phase that gets us to the end result of those clear and objective standards for the resources, for protecting those resources.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick, at what point does the Planning Commission have an opportunity to, it looked like there was a meeting on there to talk with the TAC a little bit about sort of the preliminary standards that'll be used for the Technical Advisory Committee for determining what those SNORO areas are. Having gone through a Goal 5 before, that those criteria are critical. And I know what happened in the past on a couple of Goal 5 type situations was that we got down the road and then the criteria didn't end up matching what sort of the policymakers at the end of the road wanted to see, and it ended up going backwards again. I certainly don't expect, as a Planning Commission member, obviously Commissioner Will is on the TAC, don't expect to be part of that every step of the way, but I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to give Commissioner Will and Commissioner Lockwood our feedback before those get adopted or used.
Sure. So we've kind of have the TAC it serves as an advisory role, and they will be helping to inform the Planning Commission. We'll get that feedback to you as we have work sessions along the way. So we'll kind of take these steps of what we're doing. Like when we show you the inventory report, we will say, this is what the TAC thought about it, and what you'll be able to give your feedback. Along the way, as we get to developing those criteria and the standards and policies, that will hopefully be in a good spot that you'll know what those are come the time that we are filing that ordinance. And so that we'll have heard what you think your recommendation is for that before we get to the filing point. So we kind of have an idea where you're coming from in a general sense before the ordinance is filed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Will.
I was just going to say, feel free to contact me offline anytime, email, if you have a question about anything you might be reading on the website or hearing from a community member or had a question. Be happy to answer any questions so that you understand, because this is a really, really technical lot of things that's going to take a long time, and you're not going to be hearing about it all the time. So feel free to give me an email, and I'm sure I don't want to volunteer Commissioners Lockwood or Will, but I'm sure that they'd be happy to help get your point of view across or hear what you have to say too along the way, as they are both serving on our Technical Advisory Committee.
Commissioner Milliman.
Thanks, Chair Lockwood. Speaking of timing, did I see a timeline anywhere? What is the estimated? How long is this expected to take? At least the inventory, and then
sure. I think
estimate when the guidance would come out.
We kind of had a rough timeline early on slide 7. If you could pull that up, Chuck, or if it is Chuck, I think it's Chuck. There we go. So we're working on the inventory right now.
Sorry, I missed the whole right side of that slide.
That's okay. That's okay. It has a lot of information on it. So you can kind of see some of the steps we're kind of do simultaneously. So there'll be some overlap, but we hope to have a draft inventory report this fall. By the time the community forum is, along with some of the ESEE also starting to formulate. And then we need to meet that deadline that we have in October 2024. We have to file our ordinance in early April, I think. April. So it'll come fast, really. So a year from now, I'm sure we'll be in lots of meetings to be talking about this. Hopefully.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Will.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So when you say we, it's the consultants and working with staff.
Well, for the most part, yes, and we have the technical advisory committee and outreach and all those kind of things.
I just want to clarify that it's not us who's doing it. It's we. When you say we, you're talking about you and the consultants, and then you'll report
Yes.
back to us at these different
Mhm.
times. Okay.
Yes,
Not the
we
planning
have-
commission. Okay. Gotcha. Thanks.
Right, we have consultants that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the with the inventory, and an ecologist working on this, as well as a project management team with years of experience in conducting Goal 5 work, and so we've compiled a great team to help us get through this. But it is a local process with a lot of local ideas, and so we're definitely a joint effort all around.
So I wanted, you said, Michelle, the ordinance needs to be filed in April.
Mhm.
So April 24, okay. I had a question, as far as all the public engagement and outreach, how does that get memorialized, or, is there some kind of summary, or how does that work?
So as we attend the community events, we are keeping track of the interactions that we have with people and getting those numbers in general. And then I am writing, or whoever is attending and has a specific question or a comment about significant natural resources, that will write those down and point them. And that's all being tabulated internally by staff, and keeping track of it that way. Likely there'll be a component of a report of some sort that will be generated so that you can see those comments. The official comments, for the ordinance will come through public testimony. And when we have our community forum, that will be recorded, and we'll have notes and comments about what people say there. We'll have an online open house, 2 online open houses where people can comment, and then we'll likely have a survey at some point too, where people that will be recorded, and we'll have information that way as well. But the community events, it is a little bit trickier. It's more just sharing information about the project and directing people to the project website so they can continue to stay informed.
If I could just add, at the end of the project, I think we will put together a summary of all the community engagement and maybe themes that we heard, or maybe things that we changed as a result of what we heard. So we'll be gathering all of it, and since there are so many different ways that we'll be gathering the information, we'll have to think about how we put that together. But we will want to be able to share that with the Planning Commission and with the board, so they could see the kind of outreach that's been done, the kind of comments that we've had, how that influenced the process as we went through it, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Commissioner Morabito.
Thanks, Commissioner Lockwood, or Chair Lockwood. I had just some follow-up questions about the equity component of this. On the technical advisory committee, is there any representation of any indigenous groups or other opportunities for representation of people of color or different socioeconomic statuses?
When we formed our technical advisory committee, we looked to kind of the agencies, the local agency representation, because it is of a technical nature, and they selected who through that agency who should be serving on the committee. We also met with our Office of Equity Inclusion. I never get the OEIC committee, and met with the what's her
Amanda.
Amanda, I know it's Amanda, and kind of talk that through with her a little bit, saying, well, how can we get to reach the community-based organizations, or was she aware of any members that may want to serve on a technical advisory committee? And she really thought that from her work that they were very, very busy on other kind of higher priority issues, and due to the technical nature of this, that the best approach would be to really reach out to them through the newsletter process and keep them informed that way. And we would meet with any of the agencies and go over the project and get their feedback in that way, versus having a technical advisory committee member, was the feedback that we had through the OEIC at this point.
Okay, thank you for that information. I just do want to add that I think that even though everyone is really busy, it's important to present opportunities. And somebody might step up, and if those opportunities aren't presented, then we are missing valuable perspectives.
Agreed. Thank you.
Other comments and questions?
Can you briefly put back up the slide that shows the technical advisory members, so we could just browse that one more second? Thanks.
What number is that? That is slide 19.
Thank you.
Any more commissioners? Well, thank you very much, Ms. Miller. I think we're ready for our next session, which is 2023 Urban Growth Boundary Expansions.
Thank you. And Todd Borkowitz will be giving this presentation.
All right. Can everybody see the slides?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So good evening, Chair Lockwood, PC members. I'm Todd Borkowitz, Associate Planner in Community Planning with the Department of Land Use and Transportation. In this presentation, I'll be giving a brief overview of the Urban Growth Boundary, or UGB, and the UGB expansion process. So we'll be highlighting the 2023 expansions in Washington County, describing the county's ordinance process for accepting the expansions into the urban area, and then identifying next steps. Before getting too far into this, I just wanted to stress that despite all that I will be sharing with you this evening, the county's role in UGB expansion is very limited. In Oregon, UGB expansion is primarily a city-driven process and done per well-defined state and metro rules. The county primarily serves to help ensure that a city's vision for urbanization can be achieved. So on that, let's move on to the next slide. So UGB is a line, it really is just a line drawn on planning maps to designate which areas are urban and which ones are rural. Area inside the UGB can be used for urban development. Area outside must be or can be preserved for in its natural state or used for agriculture. Expansion is only allowed under certain circumstances as defined by the state and by metro. And in Oregon, UGB supports statewide planning goals through protecting farms and forests from urban sprawl and promoting the efficient use of land, public facilities, and services inside the UGB. Next slide, please. All UGB expansion, whether for the metro UGB or for a city UGB, and I'll define those a little bit more here a bit. It's guided by statewide planning goal 14, which aims to provide an orderly and efficient transition from rural to urban use to accommodate urban population and urban employment needs. The Portland metro area shares one urban growth boundary, which is managed by Metro. Cities within Metro can propose UGB expansion to Metro, and areas outside but adjacent to the Metro UGB where expansions can occur are called urban reserve areas or URAs. So cities outside of Metro, including cities like Banks, Gaston, and North Plains in Washington County have their own UGB. And these cities can consider adjacent land for UGB expansion as long as it is not designated as rural reserve. Next slide, please. So here are the two UGB expansions in Washington County in 2023. One Metro UGB expansion and one non-Metro UGB expansion. So both these types of expansions are required by the state to go through a similar but a separate, a somewhat different process that I'll be describing further. So the lower one shown here, Tigard's Metro UGB expansion, encompasses about, well, just over 500 acres. It was approved by Metro Council earlier this year in January, and then the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, approved it this May. So Tigard is inside of Metro and is governed by the Metro UGB expansion process. The expansion on the near the top of this graphic is North Plains, and North Plains is outside of Metro and is governed by the state process primarily. However, because there are adopted Metro reserves surrounding it, North Plains UGB expansion is subject to some Metro regulations. The North Plains UGB expansion of approximately 855 buildable acres was approved by North Plains City Council yesterday. And per state rules, the same UGB alignment must be approved by Washington County prior to it being considered by the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Oh,
Next slide, please.
may I ask a question? Could you explain a little bit more about the map and do the dark brown areas? I'm not sure where the expansion areas are.
Yeah. So for North Plains, the dark brown areas represent the proposed UGB expansion. The lighter brown areas represent undesignated area. It's neither rural reserve nor urban reserve.
There is a more detailed map in a little bit.
Okay,
Right.
thank
You'll
you.
be able to see better.
And let me just add that the green on this map indicates rural reserve. Those are areas that cannot be expanded into in the near term. And the blue areas, none of which are around North Plains, represents the urban reserve areas that apply to the metro urban growth boundary. All right, next slide, please. There we go. So Tigard's Metro UGB expansion is primarily to accommodate future housing demand in the city. North Plains expansion is to accommodate future residential demand, including parts and infrastructure, as well as future industrial and commercial demand. You can see kind of some of the breakdown here. In total, the two UGB expansions could result in over approximately 5,000 homes. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Tigard Metro UGB expansion. Metro was not statutorily required to comprehensively review the Metro UGB through its required 6-year cycle until 2024. However, as allowed under Metro Code, Tigard submitted a mid-cycle amendment proposal for 2 urban reserve areas, Roy Rogers East and West, shown here in green, that comprise River Terrace 2.0 after the city completed concept planning for this area. So Metro approved the proposal through a land exchange, a process allowed under state law that has been used successfully elsewhere in Oregon, but never by Metro. The action required moving a comparable amount of buildable land elsewhere in the metro planning area. That was actually in Clackamas County. Metro opted to remove these two areas in Clackamas County from the Metro UGB that had not demonstrated readiness for development. Next slide, please. And here's a timeline for the Tigard's Metro UGB land exchange. In 21, Tigard requested the mid-cycle UGB expansion. This February, Metro opted instead to do the UGB land exchange instead of the expansion. And then soon after, DLCD deemed the UGB land exchange complete. Clackamas County did object and continues to object to Metro's decision, but DLCD in May determined that the objection was invalid. DLCD granted final approval in May, and appeals are now exhausted, enabling Washington County to move forward on transferring River Terrace 2.0 to the urban area. Next slide, please. So we're moving on to the North Plains UGB expansion. As I indicated earlier, expansion of a non-metro UGB like North Plains is required by the state to go through a similar but different process. So like concept plans required by cities seeking to expand the metro UGB, North Plains had to identify a need for additional land to meet its estimated growth in the next 20 years. As required, North Plains developed and compared alternative locations for UGB expansion to identify a preferred alternative that is accommodating and cost efficient while resulting in the fewest conflicts with neighboring land uses and the least economic and environmental impacts. So shown here is the North Plains UGB adopted alignment. Again, City Council had just adopted this last night. The blue area is current North Plains, or the current North Plains urban growth boundary. And then the purple is where they are proposing to expand the urban growth boundary. Ignore the other lines here. They were part of the broader study that North Plains had done. So yeah, just focus on the purple and the blue shaded areas here.
A question?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
So the purple areas don't contain EFC. I guess they wouldn't have any exclusive farm use. And I'm just looking at especially the right side, it looks like it's farm area right now.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this at the moment.
Okay, okay.
The area north of 26, which is a diagonal line, that's primarily the purple area north of 26 is primarily farm and forest land. So it does have that designation. The purple area south of 26 is, I believe that's primarily exception land. So it's not, it's not farm and forest land essentially.
Okay, thank you.
So next slide, please. So here's the timeline for North Plains UGB expansion that occurred August 2020 through March 2023. It included an advisory committee with city officials, Washington County staff, and others to help guide the process. North Plains City Council adopted the new alignment this last evening, like I said, and as I highlighted earlier, Washington County now needs to adopt the alignment through ordinance. Once this new boundary is adopted by the Washington County Board, North Plains could submit to DLCD for acknowledgement. So yeah, kind of the key difference is that with the Tigard UGB, it's acknowledged by the state. This process makes both North Plains and Washington County approve a boundary prior to DLCD acknowledgement. I hope that made sense. So next slide, please. So now that new UGB expansions are identified, the county must amend the comprehensive plan to reflect them. The task was approved as a Tier 1 task in the planning work program, allowing staff to perform needed ordinance development. So this process, as I mentioned, is slightly different for Metro UGB expansions like Tigard than for the city non-Metro UGB expansions like North Plains. But the basic idea holds. We move areas added to the UGB from the rural area to the urban area and change land use designations from rural to an urban holding district. Much like a recent ordinance that came before the PC earlier for expanding UGB at Witch Hazel Village South, Cooper Mountain, and Beef Bend South, Tigard's River Terrace 2.0 Metro UGB expansion process includes accepting the Metro and DLCD approved UGB expansion and applying the new urban land use designation and transferring Goal 5 resources and other designations in these areas from the Rural Natural Resources Plan. So the county's North Plains UGB expansion process, a less common type of process, includes adopting the new UGB as part of the ordinance, and one that is consistent with the city-approved boundary, and then reflect that as an interim boundary until DLCD approves the final alignment. In accordance with comprehensive plan policy, the county will apply an urban land use district to these new areas and transfer the Goal 5 resources and other designations in these areas from the Rural Natural Resources Plan. Next slide, please. So to protect and retain UGB expansion areas for future urban development until annexation to a city occurs, the comprehensive plan requires that the FD20 or future development 20-acre designation be applied to land added to Tigard's Metro UGB through legislative amendment, and that FD10 or future development 10-acre designation be applied to land added to North Plains non-Metro UGB legislative amendment. The future development designations aim to encourage and retain limited interim uses until comprehensive planning for future urban development of these areas is complete. Minimum lot area, as the names of these districts apply, is generally 20 acres or 10 acres respectively in most instances. And the new development must be constructed in a manner that does not interfere with future conversion of the land to planned urban densities and or uses. Goal 5 resources will be maintained and transferred from the Rural Natural Resources Plan to the Bull Mountain Community Plan for Tigard, or to the comprehensive plan for the urban area for North Plains. Next slide, please. So tonight is a kind of a preliminary start of the legislative process for these ordinances. We're nearing completion of documents needed for filing these ordinances, and we're hoping to file them with DLCD in mid-July, and anticipate starting ordinance hearings beginning with the Planning Commission in August. 4 hearings will follow. We will also be discussing with North Plains potential changes to update the Washington County North Plains Urban Planning Area Agreement to reflect the North Plains UGB expansion. Next slide. With that, concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borkowitz. Commissioners, comments or questions? All right, well, it sounds like we will have another chance to look at this when you've got the ordinances ready. Yeah.
We will be back. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, the next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. We have minutes from May 17th, 2023. Are there any corrections to those minutes that commissioners want to offer? I'm seeing none. So the minutes for May 17th, 2023 are adopted. Next item is Planning Commission announcements. Does any commissioner have something they want to share with us? All right, I'm not seeing any. Next item is adjournment. Without objection, we are adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.